Tonight, I've got a story about a young woman who checked into one of Oslo's most luxurious hotels under a name that apparently belonged to nobody. 3 days later, she was found dead inside her room with a gun in her hand, no identification, almost no personal belongings, and clothing labels that had been carefully removed. Stranger still, the address she gave was fake. The man she claimed was traveling with her could not be found. And decades later, investigators still cannot say for certain who she really was. If you enjoy true stories where every answer seems to create two more questions, you're in exactly the right place. Around here, those are the stories we love most. Before we get started, please hand the like button a hotel key. Tell them they've been upgraded to the penthouse, and then quietly mention that the elevator only goes to the basement. Also, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next strange case. All right, let's get into it. It's just before 8 o'clock on a Saturday night in June of 1995, and a security guard at one of the fanciest hotels in Oslo, Norway, steps into an elevator and presses the button for the 28th floor. Now, nothing about this seems dramatic yet. He's not rushing upstairs because someone screamed. There's no fire alarm, no report of a weapon, nothing like that. He's going up there because a guest hasn't paid her bill. The woman in room 2805 has been staying at the hotel for several nights, but she never left a credit card at the front desk. Staff have sent messages to her room asking her to come downstairs and settle the account, and she hasn't responded. But earlier that evening, they sent another message through the television system inside her room. And this time, someone pressed OK. So the hotel staff know one thing for sure: somebody is in there. The guard gets off the elevator and walks down this quiet, carpeted hallway. The Oslo Plaza is a luxury hotel, the kind of place where everything is designed to feel calm and private. Up on the 28th floor, you're far above the city, and at that hour, the hallway would have been almost completely silent. He reaches room 2805. There's a "Do Not Disturb" sign hanging on the door. He knocks. No answer. So he waits a moment, then knocks again. And almost immediately, from inside the room, he hears a gunshot. Just one. The guard stands there, frozen. And think about what's going through his head. He has no idea who fired that shot. Maybe someone inside just killed another person. Maybe the shooter is standing on the other side of the door, holding a gun and waiting for him to come in. Maybe there's more than one person in the room. The guard isn't armed, so he does what probably feels safest in that moment. He leaves to get help. But here's the part that will matter later. For roughly 15 minutes, no one watches the door to room 2805. No one guards the elevators. No one stands near the stairwell. That entire stretch of hallway is left unattended. Then, at around 8:04 p.m., the hotel's security chief arrives and enters the room. Inside, the television is still on. The curtains are drawn. The room is unusually neat, almost like no one has really been living there. And then he sees the bed. A young woman is lying on her back across it, dressed mostly in black, with her shoes still on. There is a gunshot wound in the center of her forehead. A 9mm Browning pistol is in her right hand. No one else is in the room. There are no obvious signs of a struggle. No broken furniture. No attacker hiding in the bathroom. And 28 floors above the street, the windows offer no realistic escape route. It looks like a suicide. A terrible one, but a simple one. Except, it isn't simple, because the serial number on the gun has been carefully removed. A briefcase in the room contains 25 rounds of ammunition. The woman has no passport, no wallet, no credit cards, no keys, and nothing that clearly identifies her. Labels have been cut out of many of her clothes. The address she gave the hotel is fake. Her phone number is fake. Even the name she used, Jennifer Fairgate, doesn't belong to anyone investigators can find. So the police are standing in a luxury hotel room with a dead woman, a gun, and a pile of clues. But they have no idea who she is. And the deeper they look into her final 3 days, the stranger this story becomes. 3 nights earlier, on the evening of May 31st, 1995, the woman who would become known as Jennifer Fairgate walked into the lobby of the Oslo Plaza Hotel. She looked like she belonged there. She was young, Probably somewhere in her 20s, with short dark hair and a polished, expensive-looking wardrobe. She spoke calmly, carried herself with confidence, and didn't seem nervous or confused. Nothing about her suggested she was desperate or trying to sneak into a room she couldn't afford. She approached the front desk and said she had a reservation. The name she gave was Jennifer Fergate. At some point, whether because of a spelling mistake or a misunderstanding, the hotel entered her surname into its system as Fairgate. That small error is the reason most people know the case by that name today. Jennifer said she was from Belgium. On the registration form, she listed an address in the town of Verlaine, along with a Belgian telephone number. She also wrote down the name of a second guest who was supposed to be staying with her, Lois Fergate. And here's where the first really strange thing happens. Jennifer did not show a passport. She did not present any other identification. She did not give the hotel a credit card. This was a luxury hotel in the middle of a European capital. Guests were normally expected to prove who they were and provide some method of payment before being handed a key. But for reasons no one was ever able to fully explain, Jennifer was checked in anyway. She was given room 2805, high above the city. At the time, nobody at the desk had any reason to study her form carefully. To the employees working that night, she was just another international traveler arriving at a busy hotel. She looked respectable. She sounded sure of herself. Apparently, that was enough. But after her death, investigators checked every detail she had written. The address in Verlaine did not exist. The postal information was wrong. The telephone number did not lead to Jennifer. Belgian authorities could not find anyone matching the identity she had provided. They could not find Lois Fergate either. There was no reliable record showing that either person existed. Even the way Jennifer filled out the form was odd. She listed information that looked convincing at a quick glance, but fell apart as soon as anyone examined it. It was not random nonsense. It was just believable enough to get her past the desk. Which raises an uncomfortable question. Had she done this before? Because checking into a major hotel without identification, without a credit card, and under a fabricated identity should have been difficult. But Jennifer managed it without causing a scene. And then there was Lois. Jennifer had registered the room for 2 people and requested supplies for a second guest. Some hotel staff later remembered her as being alone. But one employee believed a man had been standing near her when she checked in. A dark-haired man, perhaps in his late 30s or early 40s. No one could identify him. No one knew whether he entered the room. And no one could say for certain whether he had actually been with Jennifer or had simply been another guest standing nearby. So from the beginning, the hotel records contained a second person who may never have existed, while a real man may have been present but left no name behind. Once Jennifer reached room 2805, she did little to attract attention. She did not spend hours in the lobby. She did not make herself memorable to the staff. And despite supposedly traveling with another person, she was usually seen alone. Her belongings were just as unusual. She had clothing, but not the ordinary collection you would expect from someone spending several days away from home. She had no obvious travel documents, no personal letters, no photographs, and nothing that connected her to a family, a workplace, or a hometown. It was almost as if she had arrived with exactly what she needed to play the role of a hotel guest, and nothing that revealed the person underneath. Still, none of this became alarming right away. For the first night, Jennifer was simply the quiet woman in room 2805. Then, hotel records showed something investigators could never explain. The next morning, she left her room. And for almost an entire day, she disappeared. The next morning, June 1st, Jennifer left room 2805. At least, that is what the electronic lock records appear to show. Now, hotel keycard logs can tell you when a door was opened. They cannot tell you who opened it, where that person went afterward, or whether someone else was already waiting in the hallway. But when investigators later reconstructed Jennifer's movements, they found a long gap in the record. For somewhere between 20 and 24 hours, the door to room 2805 was not opened with her key. A housekeeper entered during the day and found the room empty. Jennifer was gone. And this was not like a normal hotel guest disappearing for a few hours to go shopping, attend a meeting, or have dinner. She vanished for nearly an entire day in a foreign city under a false name, without leaving behind any clue about where she had gone. No one could place her at a restaurant. No taxi driver came forward. No shopkeeper remembered her. There was no confirmed sighting of her walking through Oslo, meeting anyone, or boarding a train. And because this was 1995, investigators did not have the kind of digital trail we would expect today. There was no smartphone location history, no social media, no rideshare account, and no network of street cameras capable of following her across the city. She simply walked out of the room and disappeared. Now, here's what makes that absence so important. Jennifer had told the hotel that another person, Lois Fergate, was sharing the room with her. If Lois was real, this missing day could have been when Jennifer met up with him. It could have been why she came to Oslo in the first place. But there was another possibility. Maybe Jennifer never left alone. The hotel could not even establish with certainty how much luggage she had brought in. Staff members remembered very little about her arrival, and no one seemed able to describe a large suitcase or the usual collection of bags carried by someone planning to stay several nights. That matters, because almost everything found after her death could fit inside a relatively small amount of luggage. So during those missing hours, she may have gone somewhere to collect something, or deliver something, or meet someone she could not risk naming. Of course, there is a much more ordinary explanation. She could have spent the night with a friend or a romantic partner. She could have left the hotel simply because she wanted privacy. But ordinary explanations normally leave ordinary traces. Jennifer left none. Then, at approximately 8:50 on the morning of June 2nd, her key card opened room 2805 again. After nearly a day away, she was back. And from this point forward, her behavior became even harder to understand. For one thing, there was still no clear sign of Lois. No employee could say, "Yes, I saw that man enter with her." No one remembered delivering food for two. No second guest ever came to reception to ask for a key. And yet Jennifer had specifically registered the room for two people and requested the things two people would need. The room itself contained 2 beds. During an earlier cleaning, a housekeeper had removed or rearranged bedding that did not appear to be in use. But after Jennifer died, bedding for the second bed was present again. That does not prove anyone slept there. Jennifer could have moved it herself. But it meant someone had handled the extra bedding after housekeeping left, and investigators could not explain why. It is one of those details that sounds small until you put it beside everything else. A woman checks in under a false identity. She invents a second guest. A man may have been seen near her in the lobby. She disappears for almost a full day. Then she returns, and the room once again looks prepared for 2 people. So was Lois a real person using a fake name? Was the man at check-in the person Jennifer came to meet? Or was Lois only a piece of cover? A way to explain another person entering the room without attracting attention? The hotel's own procedures made the mystery worse. Because Jennifer had checked in without a credit card, someone at the front desk should have asked her to pay or provide a guarantee almost immediately. Instead, she remained in one of the hotel's upper floor rooms while the unpaid balance continued to grow. No one stopped her when she returned. No one demanded identification. And no one searched for the supposed second guest. She had somehow slipped through several layers of routine hotel security, and she did it while acting calm enough that nobody found her memorable. That may be the strangest thing about her. Jennifer did not behave like someone hiding from the police. She did not appear frightened. She did not rush through the lobby with her face covered. She did not barricade herself inside the room. She moved through the hotel as though she had every right to be there. At some point, after returning, she placed the "Do Not Disturb" sign outside her door. That meant the staff would give her privacy, but it also meant no one could easily say what was happening inside room 2805. Was she alone? Was she waiting for someone? Was she afraid that housekeeping might enter and see something she had brought back? Investigators later found that Jennifer attempted to call 2 telephone numbers in Belgium. The numbers were very similar, differing by only 1 digit. Neither call produced a useful lead. Maybe she remembered the number incorrectly. Maybe one was a backup. Or maybe the numbers were designed to look Belgian without connecting her to anyone at all. Either way, they only deepened the illusion that she belonged to a life in Belgium, a life the police could not find. By now, think about how carefully constructed her identity had become. A Belgian name, a Belgian address, a Belgian telephone number, a second Belgian guest. Every piece pointed investigators in the same direction, and every piece was false. That suggests one of 2 things. Either Jennifer was improvising, building a fake identity from whatever details came into her mind, or she had prepared this story before she ever entered the hotel. And if she had prepared it, then she had expected someone might eventually check. The missing 24 hours may have been the only period during her stay when she did what she had actually come to Oslo to do. But whatever happened during that time, Jennifer brought the secret back with her. On the evening of June 2nd, she stayed inside room 2805 and called for room service. A waiter would soon become the last person known to have seen her alive. And what he noticed when he entered that room would make the final hours of Jennifer Fairgate even more unsettling. By the evening of Friday, June 2nd, Jennifer Fairgate was back inside room 2805. She had been gone for most of the previous day, and nobody knew where she had been. But now she was behind the same locked door, high above Oslo, with a "Do Not Disturb" sign hanging outside. And for the hotel staff, that sign meant exactly what it was supposed to mean: leave the guest alone. At about 8:06 that night, Jennifer called room service. Her order was simple: sausage and potato salad. Nothing elaborate, nothing you would remember if you were the person taking the call. It was the kind of meal ordered by hundreds of tired travelers who did not feel like going back downstairs. 17 minutes later, at around 8:23, a room service waiter arrived at 2805. Jennifer opened the door. This would become the last confirmed sighting of her alive. Now, the waiter had no reason to study her. To him, she was just a guest waiting for dinner. But after her death, the police asked him to replay those few minutes in his mind. He remembered a young woman with short, dark hair. She appeared calm. She did not seem frightened, injured, or under immediate pressure. There was no obvious sign that someone was holding her hostage or standing behind the door. And as far as he could tell, she was alone. The waiter entered far enough to deliver the tray, and what struck him was how neat the room looked. Jennifer had supposedly been staying there for 2 nights, and the reservation was for 2 people. Yet the room did not have the ordinary mess of 2 travelers settling in. There were no piles of shopping bags, no scattered papers, no open suitcase overflowing with clothes, no personal items that gave the room a sense of belonging to anyone. It looked almost temporary, even by hotel standards. Jennifer accepted the food and gave the waiter a 50 kroner tip in cash. That little detail is easy to overlook, but think about it. She had enough money to tip generously, yet she had not provided the hotel with a credit card. She had not paid for the room. And later, investigators would find no wallet among her belongings. So where was she keeping her money? How much cash did she actually have? And if she was planning to leave normally, why had she allowed the unpaid bill to become a problem? The waiter left, and Jennifer closed the door. After that, the trail goes quiet. No one could confirm that she left the room again. No visitor came forward. No hotel employee reported seeing the mysterious man who may have stood beside her at check-in. No one ever identified the supposed second guest, Lois Fairgate. All the hotel had was a closed door, a "Do Not Disturb" sign, and a growing bill. Now, there is something eerie about a hotel room when you know how the story ends. During an ordinary stay, almost everything that happens behind the door is invisible. A guest can sleep, make calls, meet someone, pack a bag, or sit in silence for hours, and the people in the hallway will know nothing about it. That is exactly what happened in room 2805. For the rest of Friday night and into Saturday, Jennifer was essentially hidden from view. Maybe she ate the meal. Maybe she watched television. Maybe she was waiting for someone who never came. Or maybe someone else was already inside. We simply do not know. What we do know is that by Saturday, June 3rd, the hotel could no longer ignore the unpaid account. Jennifer had been allowed to check in without identification and without a credit card, which was already a serious break from normal procedure. By now, several nights of charges had accumulated. The staff needed her to come to reception, provide payment, or at least explain what was going on. So they began sending messages to the television in her room. This was a hotel system that allowed the front desk to place a notice directly on a guest's screen. The message asked her to contact reception. She did not. Another message was sent. Again, she did not come downstairs. And this is where the situation becomes more disturbing, because the hotel staff were not merely wondering whether the guest had gone out. The electronic lock records and the "Do Not Disturb" sign suggested she could still be in the room. But no one had spoken to her since the room service delivery the night before. Hours passed. Inside 2805, there was no confirmed movement. Outside, staff members continued with the normal business of running a luxury hotel. Guests checked in. Elevators moved between floors. Housekeepers worked their way through corridors. People ate, drank, and made plans for the evening. And behind one door on the 28th floor sat a woman whose name, address, telephone number, and traveling companion were all false. At around 7:36 on Saturday evening, the hotel sent another message to the television. This time, someone inside room 2805 pressed the button marked OK. That changed everything, because now the hotel knew the message had been seen. Someone was in the room, awake and close enough to the television remote or control system to acknowledge it. But that still did not answer the most important question. Was it Jennifer who pressed the button? Everyone assumed it was. But there was no camera inside the room. There was no voice on the telephone. There was no face at the door. The only proof of life was a single electronic response. Okay. And then, nothing. Jennifer still did not call reception. She did not come downstairs. She did not offer a credit card or pay the bill in cash. From the hotel's point of view, the matter had become strange, but not yet dangerous. A guest was refusing to respond, and someone needed to go upstairs and speak with her directly. So a security guard was told to check room 2805. Now, put yourself in his place for a second. You are not being warned that the woman has a gun. You are not told that she is using a false identity. You do not know that the serial number on a pistol inside that room has been removed, or that a briefcase nearby contains 25 rounds of ammunition. As far as you know, this is a routine payment dispute. A guest has ignored the front desk, and your job is to knock on the door and ask her to come downstairs. That is all. At approximately 7:50 p.m., the guard entered the elevator and began rising toward the 28th floor. Somewhere above him, the television in room 2805 was still on. The Do Not Disturb sign still hung from the door, and whoever had pressed OK 14 minutes earlier was waiting on the other side. By the time the elevator doors opened on the 28th floor, the security guard still had no reason to believe he was walking toward anything dangerous. All he knew was that the woman in room 2805 had ignored repeated requests to settle her bill. Earlier, somebody inside the room had acknowledged the latest message on the television, so this should have been simple. Walk down the hallway, knock on the door, ask the guest to contact reception, then go back downstairs. Nothing about the assignment suggested that the next few minutes would become the most important part of an unsolved mystery. The guard stepped into the hallway and headed toward room 2805. Up there, the hotel was quiet. Thick carpet softened his footsteps, and the doors lining the corridor were closed. Outside Jennifer's room, the Do Not Disturb sign was still hanging from the handle. He stopped in front of it. Then he knocked. No one answered. That alone probably did not seem especially strange. Maybe she was in the bathroom. Perhaps she was asleep. Possibly she had heard him and simply did not want to deal with the hotel. So the guard remained outside the door. Moments later, he heard something from inside. A sharp crack. One single gunshot. Now imagine being that guard. A few seconds earlier, you thought you were dealing with an overdue hotel bill. Suddenly, there is a firearm on the other side of a door less than a few feet away. You do not know who fired it. You have no idea where the gun is pointing now. There might be one person inside. There could be two. Someone may have just shot themselves. Or somebody may have just shot somebody else. The guard was not armed, and he had no way of seeing through the door. Rather than burst into a room where an armed person might still be waiting, he backed away and went downstairs to get assistance. That decision makes perfect sense from a personal safety standpoint, but it created a problem that investigators would later find impossible to ignore. For roughly 15 minutes after the gunshot, nobody was stationed outside room 2805. Think about that carefully. A gunshot had just been heard inside a room on the 28th floor of a luxury hotel. Yet during the most critical minutes immediately afterward, the hallway was not secured. No officer stood in front of the door. No guard watched the stairwell. Nobody continuously monitored the elevators. As far as anyone could later establish, the room was simply left alone. Maybe nothing happened during those 15 minutes. In fact, that may be the most likely explanation. But because nobody was watching, no one could ever prove it. If another person had been inside room 2805, this was the one window of time when that person might theoretically have had a chance to leave. Of course, there was an obvious problem with that idea. The door appeared to be locked from the inside. At the time, that made the room feel almost impossible to escape from. Still, investigators would eventually learn that the lock itself was not quite as conclusive as everyone first assumed. For now, though, none of that was known. Around 8:04 p.m., the hotel's head of security reached the 28th floor. By then, approximately 15 minutes had passed since the first guard heard the shot. He approached room 2805. The hallway was quiet again. Nothing outside suggested what had just happened. After gaining access, he entered. Inside, the television was still running. The curtains were drawn, shutting out the evening light and the view across Oslo. No attacker rushed toward him. Nobody shouted. There was no movement. Instead, the room was almost unnaturally still. Then he saw the woman on the bed. Jennifer was lying on her back. She was dressed mostly in black, and strangely, she still had her shoes on. Blood surrounded her head. A gunshot wound was visible in the center of her forehead. Inside her right hand was a 9mm Browning pistol. At first glance, the scene told a very simple story. A woman had been alone in a locked hotel room. Security had knocked. She had taken a gun. Then she had shot herself. Case closed. Except the longer anyone looked at the room, the less comfortable that explanation became. Before we get into that, though, there is something important about the timing. The gunshot heard by the first guard came only minutes after someone inside the room acknowledged the hotel's payment message. That means whoever pressed OK had been alive, or at least active inside that room shortly before the guard arrived. If Jennifer pressed it herself, then her final minutes become incredibly strange. She sees a message telling her to contact reception. Instead of calling the front desk or going downstairs, she stays in the room. Shortly afterward, security arrives. The guard knocks. Then, almost immediately, she supposedly raises the gun and fires. Why at that exact moment? Maybe she knew the hotel was finally going to confront her. Perhaps she had already decided to die and realized she was about to be interrupted. That is certainly possible. Yet there is another possibility that becomes difficult not to consider. What if someone else pressed that button? What if Jennifer was not alone when the guard arrived? Again, there is no direct proof of that. Still, the 15-minute gap means the possibility can never be completely dismissed. Once hotel staff understood that Jennifer was dead, police were called, and investigators began examining the room. What they did not find was almost as important as what they did. There was no obvious sign of a violent struggle. Furniture had not been overturned. Nothing suggested Jennifer had desperately fought another person. The bathroom was empty. No one was hiding in the room. The windows offered no realistic escape route, 28 stories above the street. Everything seemed to push investigators towards suicide. Even the gun remained in Jennifer's hand. So police naturally began with the simplest explanation. A young woman using a false name had checked into a hotel because she intended to disappear. She had isolated herself. She had brought a weapon. Then, when the hotel finally came to the door, she had ended her life. On the surface, that explanation tied everything together neatly. Her fake identity could have been an attempt to spare her family embarrassment. The missing documents could have been removed intentionally, so nobody would ever know who she was. The strange behavior could have come from someone preparing to die. Maybe there was no spy. Maybe there was no killer. Perhaps Jennifer simply wanted to become anonymous before taking her own life. But then investigators began looking at the physical evidence. First, there was the gun. Someone had gone to considerable trouble to remove its serial number. Not scratched it casually, not damaged it by accident. The identifying number had been deliberately obliterated, making the weapon much harder to trace. Next came the ammunition. Jennifer had not brought one bullet. She had not brought two. A black briefcase in the room contained 25 additional rounds. That is a lot of ammunition for someone who supposedly needed a weapon only once. Then police looked more carefully at Jennifer herself. Her right hand was positioned around the pistol in an unusual way. Her thumb appeared to have been used on the trigger. That was physically possible, but it was hardly the most natural way most people would hold a handgun. More questions appeared when investigators examined the bed. Because the shot that killed Jennifer was not the only shot fired in room 2805. Another bullet had already been fired into the bedding. It traveled through a pillow and into the bed below. Somebody had pulled the trigger once before the fatal shot. Why? Was Jennifer testing the weapon? Was she trying to work up the courage? Was somebody else checking whether the pistol functioned? Nobody could answer that. Then investigators searched for the ordinary things that might finally tell them who Jennifer was: a passport, a driver's license, a bank card, a wallet, a family photograph, a letter. Anything with a real name on it. They found almost nothing. The woman lying dead on the bed had somehow spent several days in an international hotel while leaving behind almost no trace of a normal life. Even her clothing seemed designed to frustrate anyone trying to identify her. Many of the labels had been removed. Some appeared to have been taken out carefully rather than simply torn away. By this point, the question facing police was beginning to change. At first, they had wanted to know why Jennifer Fairgate had killed herself. Soon, they were asking something much more basic. Who was Jennifer Fairgate? The answer should have been sitting somewhere in that room. Instead, every clue seemed to lead to another dead end. A false address, a false telephone number, a mysterious second guest, a missing day, a weapon with no readable serial number, 25 extra bullets, clothes stripped of identifying labels, and a woman who appeared to have died seconds after a security guard knocked on her door. From the hallway, it had sounded like a straightforward suicide. Inside room 2805, however, almost nothing was straightforward. Because once investigators started looking closely at the gun, the blood, the bullets, and Jennifer's hands, they discovered details that made one possibility increasingly difficult to ignore. Someone may have gone to extraordinary lengths to make this room look exactly the way it did. When investigators finally began treating room 2805 as a crime scene, the first thing they had to deal with was the gun. It was a Browning 9mm semi-automatic pistol, a powerful handgun, and Jennifer was still holding it in her right hand when she was found. At first, that seemed like the strongest piece of evidence for suicide. Then they looked at how she was holding it. Instead of gripping the pistol normally, Jennifer's hand was wrapped around it backward. Her fingers curled around the rear of the grip, while her thumb rested against the trigger. Basically, if she fired the fatal shot herself, she apparently held the gun in this reversed position, pointed the barrel toward the center of her forehead, and used her thumb to pull the trigger. That is absolutely possible. People do kill themselves using unusual grips, especially when trying to angle a weapon toward their own head. Still, investigators documented the position because it was strange enough to stand out. Her right hand was resting on her chest with the pistol still inside it, and according to the crime scene report, her thumb remained against the trigger even after death. But the grip was only the beginning, because when investigators examined the bed, they discovered that Jennifer had not been shot once. 2 rounds had been fired inside room 2805. The fatal bullet had entered through her forehead and exited through the back of her head while she was apparently lying on her back. The other bullet had not touched her at all. Instead, it had been fired directly into a pillow. That round passed through the pillow, continued through the mattress and bed frame, and finally stopped against the concrete floor underneath. So someone in that room had fired the Browning once before Jennifer was killed. Maybe Jennifer was testing the weapon. That explanation is certainly possible. If she had obtained an unfamiliar gun and wanted to make sure it worked before using it on herself, firing into a pillow could have seemed like a way to muffle the sound. Except there was another detail. The pillow had been turned over. Soot from the first shot was found on its underside. Blood from Jennifer's fatal wound was found on the other side. Which means the sequence seems to have gone something like this. Someone placed or held the pistol against the pillow, fired the first round, then turned that pillow over before Jennifer was shot. And once you know that, the scene starts feeling much less spontaneous. Think about it. If Jennifer was overwhelmed, terrified, or suddenly decided to kill herself because security was knocking at the door, why had she already fired a test round into her bed? Why turn the pillow over afterward? Maybe she did it hours earlier. Perhaps she wanted to hide the hole. There could be a perfectly innocent explanation for every individual detail. The problem is that room 2805 contained a lot of individual details, and they kept piling up. Forensic investigators examined Jennifer's hands. With a contact gunshot to the head, blood and biological material can sometimes be blown backward toward the weapon and the person holding it. In Jennifer's case, investigators found strong back spatter elsewhere in the room. Blood was found on the pillow. Drops reached the telephone and bedside table. Some traveled onto the wall and all the way up toward the ceiling. Yet the autopsy report noted no signs of back spatter or singing on Jennifer's hands. That bothered later forensic experts who reviewed the evidence. Not because it proved she had been murdered. It did not. Gunshot scenes do not behave exactly the same way every time, and the absence of blood on a shooter's hand is not enough to overturn a suicide finding. But with that much backspatter elsewhere, having none visible on the hand wrapped around the pistol was unusual. Then came the gunshot residue testing. Technicians sampled the skin of both of Jennifer's hands. They found no detectable gunshot residue. Again, that is not proof that she did not fire the gun. Residue can be inconsistent. The way a weapon is held, the ammunition, movement afterward, sampling technique, and other factors can all affect what is recovered. Nevertheless, forensic specialists consulted years later described the absence of both gunshot residue and backspatter as surprising enough that they would have wanted the scene investigated very carefully. And there was something else. A 9mm handgun produces significant recoil. One forensic expert noted that suicide victims can sometimes receive small marks or abrasions from the weapon moving violently when it fires. Jennifer had no obvious corresponding marks on her fingers. So now investigators had a woman supposedly holding a powerful pistol backward, firing it with her thumb, yet showing no detectable gunshot residue on either hand and no obvious blood backspatter on the hand gripping the weapon. None of those facts proves murder. Together, however, they make you stop. Then, police examined the gun itself. Normally, if investigators recover a firearm, one of the first things they do is run the serial number. That number can help identify when a weapon was manufactured, where it was sold, whether it was stolen, and sometimes who legally owned it. Whoever possessed Jennifer's Browning had made sure that would be difficult. The serial number had been deliberately removed, not just scratched with a knife, not casually filed down. According to the investigation, it had been professionally etched away. Norwegian forensic technicians were eventually able to recover portions of 2 overlapping serial number sequences, but several characters remained missing, preventing a complete identification. Belgian authorities established that the pistol had probably been manufactured around 1990 or 1991 at Browning's factory in Herstal, Belgium. Beyond that, the trail died. Now ask yourself a very simple question. Why would a woman planning to kill herself care whether the gun could be traced afterward? Maybe she bought it illegally, and the serial number had already been removed when she acquired it. That happens. A black market weapon does not automatically mean espionage, organized crime, or murder. But remember what investigators already knew about Jennifer. Her name was fake. Her address was fake. Her phone number was wrong. Her supposed employer did not exist. Her traveling companion could not be found. Now the weapon beside her had effectively been given a fake identity too. Then investigators opened a black attaché case found near the bed. Inside were 25 live 9mm cartridges. Nothing else. No papers, no notebook, no business documents, just ammunition. Additional rounds were already associated with the pistol, bringing the total amount of live ammunition recovered to 34 rounds. Again, there is nothing impossible about this. A box of ammunition comes with more than one bullet. Someone buying a handgun illegally might simply receive ammunition with it. Still, if Jennifer's only intention was suicide, investigators had to wonder why she arrived at a luxury hotel carrying a semi-automatic pistol and enough ammunition to reload it several times. Then they turned to her belongings. And this is where the mystery stopped looking like a strange suicide and started looking like somebody had tried to erase a human being. Police searched for a passport. There was none. They looked for a driver's license. Nothing. No handbag. No keys. No wallet. No credit cards. No letters. No photographs. There was almost nothing that could connect this woman to another person anywhere in the world. Even more bizarrely, despite Jennifer appearing carefully dressed and made up, investigators found essentially none of the cosmetics or ordinary toiletries you would expect a young woman to bring on a multi-day trip. There was, however, a bottle of men's cologne. Police checked it for fingerprints. The only identifiable print belonged to Jennifer. But the clothing was what really caught their attention. Someone had systematically removed identifying labels from almost everything she owned. Some labels had simply been cut out. Others appeared to have been removed carefully, stitch by stitch. That is an important distinction. Anybody can become annoyed by an itchy tag and cut it out of a shirt. People do that all the time. But when labels disappear from garment after garment, including items packed for travel, it starts to look less accidental. Only one major clothing label had survived. It was inside a gray blazer made by the German fashion house René Lazard. Investigators believed the reason it remained was simple. Removing it would have required cutting into the jacket's lining. The blazer had been sold in Germany. A turquoise travel bag in the room was also made by a German company, Travelite. Then, police examined Jennifer's black shoes. The manufacturer's name had been removed from the insoles. Only 2 words remained: made in Italy. So even the clothes on her body had been stripped of clues. And there was one more strange problem with those shoes. A housekeeper who had cleaned room 2805 earlier remembered noticing a pair of shoes beneath the luggage shelf because she thought they were attractive. Years later, when shown photographs of the shoes Jennifer was wearing when she died, the housekeeper said they were not the same pair. Yet police found no second pair in the room. If that memory was accurate, then somewhere between the cleaning and Jennifer's death, another pair of shoes disappeared. Maybe Jennifer threw them away. Perhaps she wore them during those missing 24 hours and left them somewhere. Or maybe someone removed them. Nobody knows. By this point, investigators were facing a pattern that was becoming very difficult to dismiss. Anything ordinary that could identify Jennifer seemed to be missing. Anything traceable seemed to have been altered. The hotel registration pointed toward a life in Belgium that did not exist. The firearm's serial number had been erased. The labels in her clothes had been removed. Her wallet and identification were gone. Even her luggage contained remarkably little personal material. And yet somebody had overlooked just enough tiny details to leave investigators chasing shadows across Europe. A German blazer, a German travel bag, Italian shoes with the maker's name removed, a Belgian pistol, 2 attempted Belgian phone calls, a men's fragrance, a diving watch that would eventually become another clue. Each object seemed to point somewhere. None of them told police who she was. And that brings us back to the most uncomfortable possibility in the entire case. Suppose Jennifer really did kill herself. Then what happened in room 2805 begins to look less like a sudden act of despair and more like a carefully prepared disappearance. She may have deliberately entered Norway under a false identity. She may have removed every document that could reveal her name. She may have stripped labels from her clothing. She may have acquired an untraceable gun. Then she may have checked into one of Oslo's most famous hotels, knowing that when she died, police would have no easy way to tell her family who they had found. That is disturbing enough. But there is another possibility. What if Jennifer did not remove those things? What if somebody else made sure her passport, wallet, toiletries, extra clothing, and identifying possessions were gone? What if the gun was already untraceable because it belonged to someone who never wanted it connected to them? What if the first shot into the pillow was not Jennifer testing the weapon? What if the strange grip and clean hands were not meaningless details? And what if that 15-minute gap after the security guard heard the gunshot mattered far more than anyone realized? Police ultimately leaned heavily towards suicide because the room showed no obvious struggle. The pistol was in Jennifer's hand and the door appeared secured. But investigators still had one enormous problem that no crime scene theory could solve. They could not find Jennifer Fairgate. Not alive. Not in Belgium. Not in any registry that matched the woman lying on that bed. Nobody reported a missing daughter who clearly fit her description. No parent arrived to identify her. No boyfriend recognized her. No employer called the police. It was as if this young woman had stepped into Oslo from nowhere, spent 3 days inside a luxury hotel, and then vanished again, except for the body she left behind. And when investigators finally stopped asking how Jennifer Fairgate died and began asking who she really was, the few clues they had left started pointing away from Belgium. They started pointing toward Germany. For years after the woman in room 2805 was buried, the case barely moved. Police had followed the Belgian address, the telephone numbers, the fingerprints, the gun, the clothing, and the strange second name on the hotel form, and every road had ended in the same place. Nothing. Eventually, though, technology caught up with a mystery that had been sitting still since 1995. More than 2 decades after her death, investigators and journalists returned to the one thing Jennifer could not cut a label from or wipe a serial number off: her own body. Her grave was reopened, and scientists began looking at her teeth for clues about where she had grown up and how old she actually was. What they found immediately challenged one of the few things Jennifer had told the hotel about herself. On the registration form, she had claimed to be 21. New analysis of her teeth suggested she was probably about 24 when she died, with a relatively narrow margin of error. Another test examined chemical signatures locked into her teeth from childhood. the kind of traces that can reflect the water and geology of the place where a person grew up. Instead of strengthening the Belgian story, those results pointed investigators toward Germany. That was interesting because Germany had already been hiding in the background of the case. Jennifer spoke German as well as English. One of the only clothing labels that had not been removed was inside a René Lizard blazer, a German brand, and investigators learned that particular jacket had been sold in Germany. Her turquoise travel bag came from another German company, Travelite. Even the expensive dental work in her mouth was consistent with techniques used in Germany and several other Western countries. None of those details proves she was German, of course, but taken together, they made the identity she gave at the hotel look even more like a cover story than a mistake. Then came the possibility that modern DNA might finally do what fingerprints, phone records, and missing person reports had failed to do. Genetic evidence offered investigators a completely different way of approaching the mystery, and Norwegian authorities later considered whether genetic genealogy, the same kind of technique that has cracked other decades-old cases, might eventually help identify her. So far, however, no publicly confirmed DNA match has given the woman in room 2805 a real name. As of 2026, she remains publicly unidentified. Now, once the German clues started appearing, a theory that had always hovered around this case became much harder for people to ignore. Maybe Jennifer Fairgate was not an ordinary traveler at all. Perhaps she was connected to intelligence work. At first, that sounds like exactly the kind of thing people say when a mystery gets old enough. No identity, fake name, strange gun, so naturally somebody says, spy. Except this case contains a few details that make the idea difficult to laugh off completely. She used a carefully constructed false identity. Someone had systematically removed identifying labels from her clothes. The pistol had been made difficult to trace. A large Citizen Aqualand diving watch sat on her wrist, the kind of rugged equipment that naturally attracted attention from people looking at possible military or intelligence connections. Her room contained almost nothing personal. Meanwhile, a man may have been seen with her at the hotel, yet the supposed companion named Lois Fairgate vanished from the story entirely. Former Norwegian intelligence officer Ola Kaldager later said several of those details were consistent with methods intelligence professionals might use when trying to conceal identity and origin. Still, consistency is not evidence. No intelligence agency has publicly claimed her. Nothing found in room 2805 proved she had ever worked for a government. There was no coded notebook, no diplomatic passport, no classified document, and no confirmed handler waiting somewhere in Oslo. So the spy theory remains exactly that, a theory. Yet even if you throw espionage out completely, you are still left with two explanations that refuse to sit comfortably beside all the evidence. The first is suicide. From the police perspective in 1995, that conclusion made sense. Jennifer was found alone. The gun was in her hand. There were no obvious defensive wounds, no clear signs of a fight, and the door appeared to have been secured from inside. Add the false identity and missing personal belongings, and you can build a very sad but very coherent story. Maybe she came to Oslo specifically because she wanted to die where nobody knew her. Perhaps removing the labels, abandoning her documents, and using a false name were not signs of espionage at all. Instead, they may have been one final attempt to make sure her family could never be contacted. That explanation would also account for something people sometimes forget when discussing this case. A person determined to disappear can behave in ways that look bizarre to everyone who survives them. But then you have the other side. Why was there no detectable gunshot residue on her hands? How did her hand remain so clean despite the blood spatter elsewhere? What was the purpose of the first shot into the pillow? Where did she obtain a gun whose identifying number had been professionally removed? Who was the dark-haired man a receptionist remembered seeing near her? And what exactly happened during those 15 minutes when nobody watched the hallway after the guard heard the shot? Individually, none of those questions proves murder. Together, they are the reason this case never feels finished. The homicide theory says somebody killed Jennifer, arranged the gun in her hand, removed whatever belongings might identify her, and left the room looking like a suicide. For a long time, one major fact seemed to make that scenario almost impossible: the door. Investigators believed room 2805 had been security locked from the inside. If Jennifer was dead on the bed and the door was locked in a way that required someone to remain inside, then where could a killer possibly have gone? 25 years later, that assumption was tested. VG examined the same type of hotel locking system and demonstrated that the supposedly decisive locked from inside condition could be manipulated far more easily than investigators had believed. In other words, a person could potentially leave and still create the appearance that the door had been secured from within. Suddenly, the locked room was not really a locked room mystery anymore. Of course, proving that someone could have escaped is very different from proving that someone did. Maybe nobody used that trick in 1995. Possibly, Jennifer really was alone when the guard knocked. Whatever happened behind that door, the physical evidence has never produced a publicly proven killer. What remains is a young woman who seemed to understand exactly how difficult it could be to identify someone in the years before smartphones, facial recognition systems, and massive consumer DNA databases. She arrived without proving who she was. Her paperwork sent police toward people and places that did not exist. Every useful label was removed from her clothing except the one that was hardest to reach. Even the gun had been stripped of the number meant to tell investigators where it came from. Then, after she died, nobody came looking for her. No mother identified the photographs. Not one father recognized the dental work. Neither did a sibling come forward and say, "That's my sister." Nor did a friend explain why she had gone to Norway. Nobody ever gave police the one piece of information that should have been easiest of all, her name. And maybe that is the detail that makes this story stay with you. Somebody knew this woman before she became Jennifer Fairgate. Somewhere, she had a childhood, a birthday, people she spoke to, places she returned to, and a name that someone must have called across a room. Yet on May 31st, 1995, she walked into the Oslo Plaza and, for all practical purposes, became another person. 3 days later, that person was dead. Decades of investigation have brought us closer to her age and perhaps closer to the part of Europe where she grew up, but they still have not brought us back to the woman she was before room 2805. So maybe the final question is not whether Jennifer Fairgate was a spy. Perhaps it is not even whether she killed herself or someone killed her. The question I keep coming back to is much simpler. Whoever erased this woman's identity did an extraordinary job. If Jennifer did it herself, then she succeeded at something almost unimaginable. She disappeared without actually leaving. But if someone else erased her identity, staged that room, and walked away during those 15 unguarded minutes, then the most frightening part of the story is not that we still do not know who Jennifer Fairgate was. It is that the person who did know may have been the last person to see her alive. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know in the comments what you think really happened inside room 2805 and whether you believe Jennifer was truly alone. If you want another strange, true story that gets harder to explain the deeper you go, there's another one waiting for you right here.